Today I want to talk about something that if I had to list one thing that would help you to be more effective as a minister or whatever your role in life, if you could only do one thing and do it well, there would be the one thing I would encourage you to do is, seatbelts on, buckle up, to be an avid reader. Not just listen to podcasts and not even just listening while you're driving down the road, listening to books. Those things are good. But I'm talking about with your iPad or Kindle, or really with just a real book, like a real book, one of these things, to sit down regularly and read intentionally, and to read at least one book a week. I want to encourage you to read at least one book a week. Now, hold on, don't run, don't turn this off. I know you say I'm busy, you don't really enjoy reading. The truth is, especially with men, women are a little better, but with men, after they get out of school, the average man never reads another book for the rest of their life. That's what the statistics tell us, which is insane, especially if those of us that are in the ministry. And so I want a couple things just over the last couple of days in my reading that stood out to me. I'm reading a book by John Piper, The Pleasure of God. But anyway, he's writing a quote that really stood out to me, and I'm going to read it to you. It's a little section, the necessity of cultivating the life of the mind, in this book. And one of the things that brings God pleasure is when we love Him with our minds. We think soundly. So it was this point. But he's talking about John Wesley. And you think you're busy, and I'm sure you are, but John Wesley was one of the leaders of the Great Awakening in England. We know that. And his spiritual DNA is deep in the Church of God, in the holiness movement, and then what came out of that, the Pentecostal movement. So a lot of our theology comes from John Wesley. And so that's why he's kind of a spiritual father to us. And he rode over a 250,000 miles on horseback in his lifetime in the ministry. He preached over 40,000 sermons, often starting at daybreak and preaching all day long, 3 and 4 times a day. He started medical clinics for the poor. He found cures for diseases, wrote in his journal. He was an avid writer. He wrote songs. He left over 5,000 written tracts, pamphlets, and sermons. But in spite of all of this, he was an avid reader. And he's writing to a pastor, a fellow minister. He's writing to him, and Piper quotes him. And so let me read this letter that Wesley wrote to him. He's trying to encourage him to be a better preacher. He says, "What has exceedingly hurt you in times past, nay, and I fear to this day, is want of reading. I scarce ever knew a preacher who read so little, and perhaps by neglecting it you have lost the taste for it. Hence your talent in preaching does not increase. It is just the same as it was 7 years ago. It is lively, but not deep. There is little variety. There is no compass of thought. Reading only can supply this, with meditation and daily prayer. You wrong yourself greatly by omitting this. You can never be a deep preacher without it, any more than a thorough Christian. Oh, begin," and puts an exclamation point, "fix some part of every day for private exercises. You may acquire the taste which you have not. What is tedious at first will afterward be pleasant. Whether you like it or not, read and pray daily. It is for your life. There is no other way, else you will be a trifler all your days and a superficial preacher. Do justice to your own soul. Give it time and means to grow. Do not starve yourself any longer. take up your cross and be a Christian altogether. Then will all the children of God rejoice, not grieve over you. Now, boy, how would you like to get a letter like that from your spiritual father, admonishing him to read and warning him of the cost of not reading? And it is so easy to just blow by a day, a week, a month, a year, and do virtually no reading. And of course, I'm sure you read your Bible. But if we think God calls people to preach and to teach, then other books, Paul, you know where Paul in his writings, he talked to Timothy there at the end of his life, bring the parchments, bring the books, he was telling him. A growing minister, a growing leader in any capacity, there's something you'll find out about them. In all fields of life, they are avid readers. What's the old adage? Leaders read, and I forget how it goes. I forget, but leaders lead, leaders read. And so I want to encourage you to be a reader. There's another, here's C.S. Lewis says that you should read, every third book should at least be 100 years old. And so this is one of my favorite books, Lectures on Preaching by Phillips Brooks. Phillips Brooks lived during the time of Abraham Lincoln, actually preached his funeral. And just a great guy. This book, and this is one of the originals, an old book. I ordered it. But it's lectures to Yale Seminary, back in the day when Yale was like a real seminary. But he talks about his own experience when he went to seminary, and he got there, and the guys were so fired up. There was these young preacher boys, and they were all fired up. And the first thing they took him to a prayer service, and they were praying and seeking God. And he said, I felt so guilty. But then the next day when he went to class, it was obvious that they had not done their lessons. They didn't know what the instructor had taught them to do. And he went on, and he words it so well, but he talks about how there were really just a lot of hot air because they didn't discipline their mind. And I'm afraid I've seen far too many pastors, far too many ministers that are shallow. There are a lot of lightning and thunder, but there's very little rain. And it's because they don't feed their soul. They don't feed their mind with disciplined reading. And so I don't know what else to say about it. It just, you have to sit yourself down and do it. You have to make time. I want to encourage you to make it your goal eventually to read a book a week. I'm going to include with my notes, I have 15 categories. I usually read at least 4 books at a time. Just to sit down and read straight through a book, my brain can't handle that either. So I read 4 at a time, and I read them throughout the day. I take little breaks and I read them throughout the day, but I measure it out where I at least read 1 book a week. I usually average more than that, but I've been doing it for years. But I'm going to include this in my notes with the blog here that'll go out. But the 15 categories, because if you're not careful, you just read what interests you, and you won't be broad. And you want to read and make yourself not only know the Bible, but know the times that you live in, and you learn history and different things. It just makes you broader and deeper when you read broad and you read deeply. And so this is alphabetically ordered. It's no particular, these are just the 15 categories that I have. I start with apologetics, being able to defend and define the faith. Biographies and history, a huge way to broaden your mind and learn from people. Then the third category, books that must be reread. There's some books that you only read once in your life. There's some that you need to read twice. There's some that you need to read every so often. You need to know what those books are and go back to them. You go back and you learn from them. Church management and leadership. And if you're watching this and you're another profession, then it would be in your profession. But you want to be good at what you do as a professional in your vocation. Current interest. There's always something that I got a couple things that's of current interest to me. And so with 15 books here, I read about 4 in each category a year, once a quarter. And so whatever that is, then devotional reading. A lot of our reading, if we're not intentional, will be just devotional reading, and nothing wrong with like a Max Lucado, but it's shallow. It's just easy. It's quick reading, and and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not all you want to read. You want to read deeply and broadly. And then I have favorite authors. Like John, the reason why I'm reading John Piper right now is he came under the favorite author. I have a list of authors, and I just read them when they come up. I'll put John Piper at the bottom of the list, and the next time this comes up, who's ever at the top of the list. And so I have favorite authors. I read fiction. There's certain types of fiction that I like, and you can learn. There's fiction sometimes is truer than true life, and so good fiction is a good way to relax your mind, but also learn. Finance. This is the other golden rule. Who has the goal rules. And most, especially us preachers, we're the world's worst sometimes at knowing how to handle finances. Marriage. It's amazing. The people get married and they never read about marriage. They never grow. 4 times a year at least, I'm reading a book about marriage. Personal growth and health, and this is kind of a broad category, but about health and diet, but also about my mind, so just different things. And then philosophy and sociology, and this could be current events. This could be things that impact you. So that's a broad category. Then as a preacher, I read at least 4 books a year on preaching. That's what this particular book, this is one that I read over and over. Philip's, his lectures on preaching. But 4 times a year, you want to be good at what you do. And then sermons. I read regularly. I read sermons over and over. I not just listening to sermons, but when you read them and you kind of outline them as you're going along, and you begin to see how they think. But anyway, and then theology, just different theological. I have it broke down. I'll go through a season. I'll study, like I've been studying the Trinity a lot, or the Holy Spirit, or during the Easter season, I always read something about the atonement, but just different theology. So that's my 15 categories. You may develop one a little different, but bottom line, I just remembered my saying, he who reads leads. And if you study the history of great men and great women, almost without exception, they were great leaders, great readers. So I want to encourage you, be a reader. Discipline yourself for your sake and for the sake of those that you serve. God bless you. We'll see you around the bend. Let's keep running to win.